So RCD stands for Regenerative Community Development. And I conceptualize it this way because all life exists as nested and networked communities of communities. Right? So this idea that things only exist in relationship to other things, right? There's nothing exists by itself. And in nature, and humans are nature, right? Things only exist in communities. Like even if we think of one human individual, we're not just us, we're actually this community of cells and organisms that's much more than us, right? Like bacteria, viruses, fungi. It's actually a little bit scary when you know what's going on in your body, that you've got more cells that are not human than are human, like creating this ecosystem that is you. So everything exists, in community, in relationship. And today we're talking about the process of regenerative community development, because we haven't gone over that yet. We've gone over a lot of criteria and standards for what is regenerative. And today we're going over the process, because the process has to be regenerative as well. Okay, and I was explaining how we're all, if we're involved in a regenerative process, we're all practitioners of regenerative development. And we will have sort of guides and facilitators as well. And so our role in this process then is that we're really embarking on a discovery of place, right? Like what makes our place function to its highest level of health? What have been the things that have affected it thus far, geographically and spatially, to get to where we are? What are the things that have made it healthy in the past or have not made it healthy? What are the things that could make it healthier now? Right? Because regeneration really is about how to manifest the highest levels of health and well-being for all life. Right? So that's why I'm using this word health. So it's not just human health, but it's health for all life. This is also a process of eliciting and developing deep care and love for our place and our will to act differently, right? Because a lot of times we know we need to change, we know we need to do things differently, but we just don't. And there's a huge body of science on this, why this happens. But the simple fact is we need to care enough to do things differently. Okay, so this is a process also of developing deep care and will for place. We're also developing the capacities to continually evolve, develop, improve, and manifest potential. And again, this idea of potential is the idea of the highest health of our place. And also the bigger systems that our place affects, right? So anywhere we are, like your farm, your regenerative agriculture initiatives, they're part of larger communities. And so the farm and everything that goes on there affects the health of those larger communities. And we have to be very aware of that, because regeneration is not only about the project that we're focusing on, but it's also about those larger communities that our project affects. We're trying to increase the health and well-being in our unique way as a project or a practitioner or individual of those larger contexts and those larger communities. We're also developing community leaders, right? Because we need people who will, move forward with these initiatives, no matter what else is going on in the world or in our local community. So often these are called champions, our core team. They're known in different ways, but this is a key for any initiative to be successful. We're also developing more holistic worldviews. So I've talked in the past about how our thinking and our consciousness is really the key to regeneration, right? Our thinking and our consciousness have to be holistic and regenerative. And we're developing healthy ecosystems, right, of humans and more than human life. Okay, so the first step in this process is that we are exploring with the community. So that's the community of the project, but also the larger community that the project is a part of. We're exploring with them, what does regenerative development mean? We're connecting this new concept with concepts that we already know about and care about to make a bridge. We're making sure that the main ways that regenerative development is unique is understood. And so I've talked about these before, and they're things like manifesting potential of a place. So the potential, again, is its potential for the highest level of health and well-being for the project, as well as those larger communities it's a part of, and the role it plays in manifesting the health of those larger communities. We're understanding that regenerative development is about wholeness. It's a very holistic approach that integrates all of those elements of health and well-being. Health focused and reciprocity, right? We always want to be in positive reciprocity and mutualism with the rest of life. Okay, then the second step is to explore place. So I have a tool for this. That's that integral perceiving tool, which we'll look at next. But what we're doing here is, as a community, we're really understanding, like I said, what are those relationships and processes and flows that create the health of our place, or are doing the opposite, creating a state of, less than the highest level of health, of degeneration. Right, so we want to understand these things. We want to understand the eco-cultural relationships and the patterns in space and time that have given, or need to be present to give more life to a place. So viability, vitality, and evolutionary capacity. So that means the ability to keep growing and changing and thriving throughout time. So here's that integral perceiving tool, which I think I've talked about in every jam session so far, where, like I talked about, communities of communities, right, are nested across scale and networked. So you see, that's why we have individual, site, community, watershed, and so on. And this goes all the way up to the global scale. There's no end to how our scales are nested and networked. They're constantly exchanging things across scale. So that's why you see food, soil, nutrients, and so on as these, what I call flows across scales. Right, so we're always looking at how these things are, relating to each other in space and time across scales to create this state of health or regeneration in our place. So for example, on your farms, your regenerative agriculture farms, you're obviously growing food, right? But you're also thinking about, how does how we grow food affect the water quality, and how does how we're using water, impact the food and the soil and the energy and the nutrients and so on. And so for any point you're looking at, let's say, you're looking at the finances of how this works. You're obviously looking at how the finances are interconnected, with every other part of the system. And these aren't all the things you have to think about, but they are some of the most important ones. So for any particular place and project, we're looking at probably all of these things, and there's space to create, more for your local situation, which is that others category. Now we want to look too, I said, about how things flow across scale. So water, for example, right? The water in the farm is coming from somewhere, and you use it in ways that nourish more life, and then it's going somewhere. And so we always want to look at how these flows across scales are nourishing more life as well. And what is the role of our projects in nourishing more life across those scales? Okay, so then the next step is to develop a regenerative concept. Okay, so what this really is that we are existing in very complex systems, and it is literally impossible for our brains to comprehend the complexity. Right? We can't even perceive it all the complexity, but there are a few key factors that influence the system and how it behaves and its health. So what we can do is, after that second step of exploring place, what we can do is put into a narrative form what we've discovered and what we currently understand as what we need to do as our unique role in the system to help it have higher levels of health and vitality. Okay, in this story, it's a narrative, so it helps people be able to understand the information better, relate to it, develop that deep care and will, and it's going to guide the development and design efforts, right, thus far. So we can always come back to this story of place and see if we're in alignment with it, if what we're doing is actually supporting that story of place. And it's also going to assure alignment with regenerative development principles and the life-specific patterns in our place. Again, it elicits this deep care, will, and action in the community, and it's going to serve as a touchstone throughout the process. Okay, then I mentioned that there are a few elements in a complex system that really determine are the largest, most important influencing factors in how that system functions. And so these are called nodal leverage points. So these are places where a lot of flows are converging together in one place. And food, agriculture is a fantastic example of a nodal leverage point. You have so many things coming together in food, right? You've got the water, you've got energy, finances, culture, like the soil health, organisms, like so many things come together in food. And so that's one reason why regenerative agriculture is getting so much traction right now, and why it is one of the best things we can do to help shift whole systems to become more regenerative, right? Because food is such a powerful nodal leverage point. But there are also others, like water is often a very powerful nodal leverage point. So we're just going to identify these, and then through the next steps, we're going to figure out how we can act on those nodal leverage points to really catalyze change throughout the system, so we can create more regenerative communities and bioregions and so on. Okay, then we are going to work on creating guilds. So guilds, of course, permaculture, so you're familiar with this. I'm sorry about that, guys. I don't want to stop right now, though, to stop the pop-ups. But guilds, since you're familiar with permaculture, they're these rather diffuse networks of positive reciprocity. So in nature, positive exchange is not necessarily one-to-one, right? It can happen. One organism could give another organism a benefit, and then it goes to organism C, D, E, and so on. And it might not come back to organism A for a while, but it will eventually. And so the system works as a whole so that all life, right, increases in health. And so that's what we want to do as humans too. We want to create these guilds or networks of positive reciprocity that don't necessarily have to be one-to-one. So we're going to look for partners, and this is where we're looking outside of our system of interest. So outside of the farm, outside of the school, and so on, to see who are those partners who are going to benefit from what we're doing and will help us with our projects, because they're going to benefit as well. And then we can start creating those networks that throughout the region and the community can really catalyze change. Okay, and here's just a graphic of how this works. And you probably already have a feeling for what I'm talking about, but this is a good example, right? Where the smallest circles are your focal point of your project. So like your farm. And there are many other, circles like that. Other farms, other communities, other initiatives, other projects. And what you're going to do is try to network with those. And you're going to network upscale as well. So that next largest circle would be those larger communities that your project can benefit, right? And that next scale up, that scale can also network in the same way. And so you can keep networking across scale like this to really catalyze that change. All right, so then our next step is we're going to identify goals and strategies. Okay, so based on our regenerative development concepts, our exploring place step, everything we've learned so far and everything that we know about how we can create health and well-being, we're going to create these goals and strategies. Okay, and these are all place-based. So far we've used like general regenerative development principles and characteristics. And at this step, these goals and strategies are going to become very specific. So we're going to adapt all those general principles and characteristics to really specific goals and strategies. And we're going to use the Regenerative Community Development Evaluation tool to help us with this. So I'll show that in a minute. So here are those principles. And I'm not going to run through this so much right now, because I do want to have time to answer questions and discuss. We can always come back to this. But the principles are wholeness, change, and relationship. Then we have sub-principles. So I've talked about a lot of these already, and they're in previous recordings of the jam session. And then here are those characteristics of healthy and regenerative living systems. right? So I've grouped them into like meta categories, and then you've got each of the characteristics listed there. So again, we can always come back to this. But then we have our strategies, right? So our principles and characteristics help inform these general strategies. And these are things that have been shown to work thus far, right, in regenerative projects and initiatives and communities, experiments basically, about what are the things that we can do, actions and strategies to help manifest those regenerative characteristics and principles. Okay, so a lot of these you're familiar with and you're probably already doing. Things like, co-creativity, ecological design, permaculture, meta design, which is design that shifts the world and shifts worldviews, like deep participation. We want inclusivity and diversity, local economies, co-production, which means we're having kind of like public-private partnerships. So government can be involved as well as public organizations and private organizations. We want to have things like rituals and celebrations, right? So we can really help shift that cultural piece and that consciousness and worldview piece. We want equity, full cost accounting. There are a lot of different strategies, and this is really just a small sampling of everything that we could do, but it can give us some ideas to get started. Okay, so once we decide on our strategies and our goals, right, and our goals, I didn't talk about that, so let me do that now. Our goals can be things that are quantitative as well as qualitative, right? So the principles and characteristics that I just talked about usually are our high-level goals, but we might want to make those more specific for our place. And that is another area where these metrics can help us. Okay, so here are some of the indicators that we can use to help us know if we're on the right track to become more regenerative. And so I should say that moving from degenerative to regenerative is a spectrum, and it's a process, right? We're constantly, living systems are constantly changing and constantly kind of moving around with where they are in the spectrum. So as humans, we want to be conscious catalysts for all life to thrive. So we're always asking ourselves, where is the system right now as far as its relationship to being regenerative? And what's our role in that? How can we act in the system in ways that help it be more regenerative? So our indicators can help us with this, right? And the indicators are going to be quantitative as well as qualitative. So indicators can be things like self-organization, adaptation, cycles, decentralization, self-sufficiency, things like positive reciprocity, and so on. And again, we're going to make these not so general like this, but we're going to put some very specific parameters on them. So they're going to be quantitative or qualitative. And this is place-based. So that's why I can't get into specifics here, because everything is place-based. Okay, then the last part of the process is actualizing systems. So what that means is not only like implementing all these steps in the process and our strategies and so on, but also we're always developing ourselves in relationship to larger wholes. So we're developing our abilities to see wholeness, relationship, and change, to see those regenerative principles, and to act in ways that are going to always move us towards being more regenerative. We're always working on eco-cultural development and evolution. And by eco-cultural development, I mean, this is the relationship of society to ecology, or the rest of life. And I use the word culture instead of just society, because culture involves, to me, a lot more than just society, right? It involves those worldviews that are so important and foundational, as well as all those other elements we typically think of in a society. So it's really a culture that we're trying to develop, right? A culture of regeneration. And also, we're always developing the capability of manifesting potential. And we can view this like in this way. And this is a diagram by Regenesis group, where the first line of work, or the first thing you're always working on is yourself, right? How are you developing yourself in relationship to those systems you're a part of and that you're serving? Right? This is ultimately important because for systems that humans impact, which is everything on the earth, we have to be very aware of ourselves and how we're behaving, how we're thinking. So we've always got that self-development work to do. And then the next line of work is growing the capabilities of the community, the team, the project. The third line of work is improving the health and value of the system. So they're saying product, which is analogous to project in the terms I've been using, but also we're looking again at those larger systems, the communities, the regions that we're impacting to make sure that those are improving in health and well-being as well. Okay, so I'll stop sharing in a minute, but for now, I just want you to know that I teach all of this in more depth in my Regenerative Community Development Certification course, and that's through the Regenerative Living Institute. And we're also offering shorter courses. So they're introductory courses and shorter like workshops where you can learn this. So you don't have to take the entire certification course. And we've also got Regenerative Leadership Program that's offered through Corey Collaborative. And so that really teaches you the regenerative community development framework. And it helps you develop as an individual and to see what are your innate capacities in serving your community and how can you develop those more. So I want to let you know those are being offered right now, and I will stop share and we can just open it up to discussion and answering questions now. Oh, you know what? There is one thing I want to share before questions. So let me show you this. Okay, characteristics of regenerative agriculture, which we have to think about agriculture as a part of regenerative food systems, right? Because we never want to think about just one fragmented piece of larger living systems. So agriculture is part of food systems, right? Food systems are part of much bigger systems. So we're always thinking with agriculture about how does it impact the holistic health of the living systems it's part of. So again, we're working with wholes and not with parts, right? We're increasing soil health and fertility, not just for our farm, but beyond our farm as well. We're progressively improving whole agro ecosystems, right? So every flow that comes in and out of that farm, we really want to increase its health. So we really want to be aware of and understand all those flows that come in and out of the farm. And these are things you might not always think of as being part of agriculture. So it's definitely, you know, the people who are working on the farm, are they stepping into like a purposeful livelihood for themselves? Is this increasing their health and well-being to be part of the farm? Or how could it? But also like the people who are, you know, buying food from the farm. How is it increasing their health and well-being beyond just consuming healthy food, right? There are other ways we can help our customers increase their health and well-being. We can educate them about regenerative agriculture and food systems, regenerative lifestyles, right? How to make water cleaner. There are all kinds of ways. We can help empower our customers to start forming guilds within the community. So again, this way of thinking about agriculture is a catalyst, right, within our community. Like food is huge, huge, huge nodal leverage point. We're connecting the farm to its larger agro-ecosystem and bioregion, holistic designs, right? So each farm is going to have a unique characteristic and essence, and we want to find out what that is and express it. Holistic decisions, right? Ideally, we want the farm to be participatory and co-creative, right? So everyone involved can sort of co-create what's happening there and really be involved and take ownership of it. Just and reciprocal relationships amongst all stakeholders, all participants. We want to be aware that we're growing not just like financial capital, but human capital, social, natural, and built. Right, so this is a 5 capital model, but there are others, right? 8 capitals, 13, lots of others. So pick what feels right for you and make sure you're growing all those capitals. We're designing for multi-capital reciprocity. We're growing and evolving individuals as well as the farm to express innate potential. We're evolving our processes and cultures, right? So change is one of those main regenerative development principles, and we want to make sure that we design for change, to allow change. And then, like I've said, agriculture shifts the world, right? Food shifts the world. So we can really take ownership of that fact that growing food in regenerative ways is like hugely impactful and hugely powerful. And we can understand the power of this to really change cultures and societies. Okay, so I'm going to stop there then, and we can open it up to discussion and questions.
Yeah, my question would be, I want to look at the principle of dynamics, and I want to focus so much on adaptation.
Okay,
yeah.
Do you want me to show it again?
Of course, but I can still, I can speak it, then
okay.
you can, yeah. Yeah, so my concern is, number one, I want to find out your experiences in regenerative agriculture adaptation, and if there has been any resistance, and why do you think there has been those resistance to adaptation, and what exactly is the process? What time frame do you think would be the adaptation, process take? Yeah, for now, I'll leave at that.
Okay. And this gets into some things I've talked about in other jam sessions where we have to understand this phenomenon of scales, right? Where smaller scales change and adapt very quickly, and bigger scales adapt slowly. And that's, there's purpose in that, there's function in that. It's not a bad or good thing. It's what maintains things in a system that have proven to be beneficial for it, but also allows for change, right? For things that are not beneficial. And so these dynamics work across scale. So it really depends on what scale you're looking at as far as how fast adaptation can happen, and how much inertia there is in the system, right? So this is another thing we've talked about before, that systems go through phases where they can become incredibly rigid and locked in, like all those relationships can become very entrenched, right, and locked in. And eventually they will release and break apart, because when relationships become that locked in and rigid, the system will not be healthy, right, at some point, because again, it has to be able to change and adapt. And if relationships are so rigid, it can't change and adapt. So which scale are you talking about? Like on the farm itself, or kind of bigger systems, maybe like policy level, high government level policy changes?
Yeah, let me just give you my focus background. Say we are looking at agriculture, okay, because agriculture becomes like a common denominator to our co-development. Now, let me draw two scales, and also focusing on just the production scales and the regional scales. I'll begin with the regional scales, which is, African agricultural system. So the context is African agricultural system. That is on a regional scale. Then on, production scale, let's look at the commercial or large scale farmer and small order farming. Now, buying from what you have just said, smaller scales adapt faster and easily, quicker. Now, when you look at the context of the agricultural systems in Africa, you're going to find that the small order farming scales, they take up a larger percentage at regional scale. Now let's come to productive scales. You find that the smallholder farmers, they contribute higher percentage in terms of volumes on how much hectareage or how much land they use. But you're going to find that their productivity also is on a lower scale. Now, these are the people that we say we are focusing. If we are to bring an innovation, or you are to bring in an approach that would regenerate the way of doing things. Now, these are the people, again, that have been taught a number of philosophies and concepts, and they have become, I would say they have entered into a deceptive mind where they believe and feel they know a lot of things. This is why I'm focusing on, for how long does it take? Say you are approaching such kind of a scale. People that have received a lot of different kind of deceptive knowledge. Yeah, so probably I'll be able to leave at that. We are looking at a regional scale, which is Africa, a productive scale, which is a smallholder farming. And with my experience, I'll share my experience with you. My passion is regenerative systems. And I've been working with thousands, I would say, of smallholder farming, who I'm not the first person who has gone to them that this is the best way to do things. You start with them, within 2-3 days, they begin to, get relaxed. So from the process that you have taken us through, which I feel is a great process, what is the best approach that would, really motivate the regenerative thriving? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think you're right to focus on, the individual farms, because at those larger scales where essentially you're going to need to have policy changes, right, to support other changes downscale. And that needs to happen, absolutely. But it takes time, right? It takes a lot of time, and it is not easy for a lot of reasons, right? But when you go directly to farmers and communities, the first thing you want to do is find out, like, what is important to them. What kind of life do they want, right? And this is one of the keys to helping people shift over to doing things in more regenerative ways. Because when you really get down to it, and people can really open up about what they really want for their life, the lives of their children, their grandchildren, their community, we all basically want the same things, right? We all want to be healthy and happy and, secure, and be able to have more purposeful, fulfilling lives. So the key then is to get communities, get farmers, right, to talk about these things and to come to agreements about really what kind of life do we want. And when you can do that, and you can get people on the same page about what we want, then you can start moving together in a way that is regenerative towards those outcomes, towards those lifestyles. And the key then is to show people that, shifting to more regenerative practices will give them what they want, right? Will give them this life that they want, this lifestyle. Whereas adopting less regenerative or degenerative or unsustainable practices will take them further away. So it's this process then of just helping people get out of their own way, right? Because like you said, people often have these misperceptions about the things that they're doing, leading to their a desired outcome. And that's often not the case, and humans tend to think very short-sightedly, right? Like a year or two into the future. Like, it is really hard to get people to think 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years into the future. But that's a huge part of regenerative thinking as well, right? That we have to be able to see that the things we're doing now, especially in something like agriculture, regenerative agriculture, we're creating ecosystems, right? Thriving ecosystems, and that takes time. And we might not even see some of the more tangible outcomes of that for a while, for 2-3 years, right? But we have to have confidence that what we're doing now will result in that. So showing people like other examples where that has happened can be huge, right? Taking people, either showing them in pictures or taking them physically to see these examples, telling them stories about where this has happened before, right? Where people shifted from degenerative ways of doing things to more regenerative ways, and sharing those stories, and sharing the stories of how people then achieved, right, the life that they want, the lifestyle they want for themselves and their communities, right, is really huge. So again, this is a process of like involving people's hearts as well as their heads, right? Because ultimately it's our hearts that have to be involved, right? Our hearts have to be excited and, you know, be willing to do these things, to implement these regenerative practices. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, perfect. In one way, I would, how do you look at this one? Maybe I'll simplify it this way. Would the approach of show me how to do it best than tell me how to do it best be a good approach to understand the dynamics of adaptation?
I think so. Except what I just said about sharing stories, it's kind of both at once, right? Where you are showing people and telling them. So the more, I think the more you can engage people's hearts and their heads simultaneously, the faster you can make those shifts. But again, you really want to focus on those heart shifts, those, you know, motivational shifts before you just start dumping information on people, because they're not receptive to it, right? Their heads, their brains are not receptive to information until their hearts are open to receive it, if this makes sense to you. So the more you can do both at the same time, the better.
Thank you. Wonderful. Yeah, this has been, you know, I'm trying to be, it's a new session and I'm trying to just stand in the gap of our students so that at least in the next session, they would flow very well with you. But this has been excellent to us. And we look forward to a more closer, you know, partnership and see how we can develop, because you see, I totally agree with you. Agriculture on its self concept, it does not make sense. This is why it seems like it's not benefiting the world. It's because we've taken so much, you know, science in an independent way without understanding that science goes with nature, and nature surrounds a lot of, you know, spheres, like the scales you have drawn. So I totally appreciate your teaching.
Yeah, thank you. And science is only one way of knowing things, right? There are many other ways of knowing. And so integrating those different ways of knowing is important also, right? Like we have so much wisdom in local communities, indigenous wisdom, right? And that should all be integrated. So science is flawed. I talk about this a lot. Like science is not like the truth with a capital T, because science is just a reflection of our own, you know, societal and individual biases and, you know, perspectives. It's not complete by any means. Yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, if not, it's almost 2, so we could wrap it up. And I just want to thank you for sharing what you're doing. It's always great to hear about people's projects and their initiatives. And again, please reach out, you know, if you feel like there's any way we can help you. We do have consulting and the courses to offer, as well as many other things. So please visit our websites and find out about those. Yeah, and if you want to hear about specific things in the future, just reach out by email and we can address, more specific topics. And I'll just leave it there. Okay, and Neil just posted a link for previous videos also. So you can view those, on your own time, kind of learn a little bit of some things we've talked about before. So thank you, Neil. All right, so thank you all, and hope to see you next week.